Proud supporters of Africa this week. Engine, with us, you are number one.
Welcome back. You're watching a special edition of Africa This Week, and we're continuing our review of the budget in Zambia. And now we will be joined on the line by Dr. Perry James Perone. He is Senior Resident Representative of the International Monetary Fund in Zambia. Mr. Perone, let's perhaps begin by getting your impressions of the overall budget. Are you worried? Are you happy? Where do you stand?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. I think, we have to do a lot more assessment of it. You know, we're numbers people and we dig into the numbers, but I think what we can say is that it appears that the new government has found a way to move forward with its agenda in a fiscally responsible manner. I mean, if you look if you bear with some of the numbers, based on our calculations and the minister's presentation today, the overall fiscal deficit would increase next year from an estimated 3.2% of GDP this year to about 4.1% in 2012. And that, of course, would require an increase in borrowing. And the numbers that the government has presented indicate that they intend to increase their external borrowing. But the good news is that Zambia's debt position is sustainable even with this increased borrowing. I think the point we would like to make, though, that as the government starts borrowing more for its expansive development spending, that the borrowing should be used to finance projects that will generate increased economic growth over the medium term so that the country can repay the loans.
Do I hear you correctly to say you have no worries in terms of the overall budget, and therefore you are pretty much happy with the numbers that the minister has presented, and therefore there's no credibility issue around the numbers that we have seen presented by the minister?
Well, I think that's, again, this is a first look, and we have,
Sure.
we have to dig in and look more at the numbers. But yes, I think basically it looks like a reasonable budget that would support continue the macroeconomic stability that the previous government oversaw.
Yeah, but I suppose when investors hear words like doubling, and particularly in the case of the mining sector here, we're hearing a doubling of the royalties tax on mining companies, and we're not pretty clear whether this is on revenue or on tax. Perhaps you can clarify that for us. But when investors hear words such as those, they do suggest a hefty increase in the burden that companies operating in Zambia, particularly in the mining sector, have to pay. Do you see this perhaps deterring investment into Zambia, or you see this as perhaps something that investors looking at Zambia would understand?
Well, look, first of all, I think that, it's well known that Zambia, its main attraction is copper. And it's also well known that for many years now, they haven't effectively taxed the copper sector. And let's not forget it's a non-renewable resource. And so, therefore, the country needs to get adequate revenues out of the mining sector. Now, whether, what the IMF work in Zambia has focused on is not so much the tax regime on the mining sector, but trying to help the Revenue Authority improve its capabilities to implement the existing regime, because there are just a lot of basic improvements in human resources and the way that the Revenue Authority is structured to audit and the mining companies, and we think that there could be a lot of benefits just from that part of it. But again, I think you have to remember that the new government has a legitimate concern that they have to find a way to get more revenues out of the mining sector. And I don't think, of course, there's always, whenever you raise taxes, there are concerns about the business community. But on the other hand, I mean, there's quite a bit of investor interest in Zambia, and I think the tax regime is one issue, but I think what Zambia has going for it is exactly what was demonstrated by this election, is that there's political stability here. There was a transfer of power. It was it was a transparent and fair election, and there were no major disruptions. And I think, you know, we can't forget that, and that certainly has to be attractive to the business community.
Yeah, sure. I've got two quick questions for you. One is the impact on the kwacha of this budget. What kind of an impact do you see?
Well, I mean, it's an expansive budget. I mean, they're increasing the deficit, but it really depends. It depends how the central bank manages monetary policy going forward, and there certainly are some inflationary pressures emanating from the world economy with the price of oil and with commodity prices. But so far, Zambia has been kind of insulated from that because they've had record harvests of maize, and that's kept their food prices down. Although the non-food prices are still stuck in low double digits. So we think that, you know, you can't just look at the fiscal policy in isolation. You have to look at the combination of fiscal and monetary policy. And so far, all we can say is that the central bank has managed monetary policy quite reasonably, and as evidenced by the fact that inflation has been in single digits since last year.
Yeah, but we're talking about a central bank chief who's since gone now, because that was the guy who managed it correctly. And we had a governor now who came in with a mandate to pursue perhaps less stringent monetary policies. So the question I was going to put to you is, we saw in the statement that the minister is promising, he says he is not going to go for a loose monetary policy, but so we imagine he's going to remain fairly tight. But at the same time, we have had the political message coming from the president that the cost of borrowing must go down.
Hi, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Yeah, well, yes, of course. First of all, what I would say is governments are always trying to talk down interest rates in the private sector. And, it certainly is an issue here. I mean, what's going to drive Zambian growth in the medium term is the private sector, and right now the cost of borrowing is extremely high especially for small and medium enterprises. But to some extent, that's a structural problem that's not unique to the Zambian economy, as all economies at this level of development face these same kinds of structural problems. You have the banks to lend to small and medium enterprises. They have problems with being able to assess the financial viability. They, you have problems with the legal system where to try to collect on a bad loan, it's very expensive and it can take a long time. So those are structural issues that need to be addressed more in the long term. As for the government's statements about trying to cajole the banks to lower the interest rates, well, that kind of goes with the territory.
Indeed. And final question. Were you consulted on the budget?
Yes, we've had some discussions with them, but really, our view, our attitude since the new government came in has been that, we've had a strong relationship with the government in the past, and we expect that to continue and be enhanced. But at the same time, we're here to be advisors and to help, and understandably, the new government has taken a lot of time to get itself organized, and, you had this first big issue of the budget, which they had to prepare, and so we're available. We've had some conversations with them. Like I say, the budget is not that different than the kind of general framework that we had agreed with them earlier in the year. So we're okay at this point. Sure.
Perry James Perone, Senior Resident Representative of the International Monetary Fund in Lusaka, Zambia. Thank you for joining us this evening. Yvonne, two quick points. One, this difficult act of balancing a looser monetary policy, sorry, not looser, but tighter monetary policy against demands on the central bank to ensure that the cost of borrowing comes down. How will they fix it, do you think?
That's going to be their challenge.
Yeah.
Firstly, as the IMF Resident Representative put forward, we have an expansionary budget, which implies that there could be inflationary pressures coming through next year.
And you need to tighten.
Yes. And Zambia has had the benefit of benign inflation to date. It's still in the single digits. We look at East Africa.
Because of a good manager.
True. Now, going into 2012, inflation is likely to pick up, given what we're seeing on the budget side. I'm sure whoever, or the monetary policy will be prudent to manage policy in keeping in consideration what's happening on the fiscal side. Now, on the side of the cost of borrowing, yes, that is an issue. Interest rate levels are quite high in the case of Zambia. It constrains, of course, particularly SMEs from operating in that environment.
Sure.
But I'm sure the authorities are not going to compromise monetary policy and allow for high inflation at the expense of cost of borrowing. So it will be a balancing act for them going
forward. And a tough one at that.
True.
So your final thoughts on the Zambian budget? You're fairly happy with this budget, but the proof will be in the pudding.
True, it's as expected, pro-poor, expansionary, but we think they're coming off a very good base, relatively low public debt levels. They've had small fiscal deficit for the past few years. We think they can finance and manage this budget going into 2012.
Yvonne Mhango, thanks very much indeed for joining us this evening.